Are we on? Are we on? I think we're on. How upset were you all last week? You didn't even think you could come back because you just missed me so much. For those of you that weren't here, I wasn't here. I was looking for a lot of emails and phone calls about what's the matter with me, where was I, and all that kind of stuff, but I didn't get any. My mother did call, but she wasn't worried. She just said, "Why weren't you there?" So what are you going to do? So all I want to say is I'm sorry. It was the first time in 28 years I've missed the first night of the Rejebian book review series. Oh, were you gone? Yeah, see, wouldn't you know? The one person that wasn't worried was Rod Pirtle. But I'm not surprised about that. So, tell us who you are. I have guests here. I am John Smith. I'm David Rejebian, for those of you that don't know, which is probably a good bit of this crowd. So anyway, we're going to have a little quiz because I want to tell you where I was. So I'm going to put a picture up here, and anybody that can recognize who I'm standing with, raise your hand. Now there's a few. Don't say it. Just not a few hands. That's where I was last Wednesday with this guy. So for those of you that don't know that guy, let's put the next picture up. So now you know who that guy was. Well, there I was in Charlottesville in all of its splendor. Now I will say that the air was so bad because of those pesky Canadians that that was about as far away as you could get and still be able to see Monticello. And the guide said when we walked outside afterwards, he said, now if you look through that hole in these trees, you can look straight down on the University of Virginia, which of course was completely laid out by Thomas Jefferson. Well, you couldn't. You couldn't see 20 yards beyond that tree. It was kind of crazy, the weather, but it began to clear up a little bit. Anyway, we had a good time. It's one of those things that you feel like if you're going to go, you better see that. So it was kind of neat. As much as I missed you all, it was still fun. So I'm glad to be back. I don't expect that I'm going to miss any more this summer. And I guess I'll have to start on a new 28-year string. What would that? Yeah, that's going to be, it'll be interesting to see if I make it that far. So anyway, we're glad you're here again. I understand we had a great week last week. And we have a great crowd tonight, whatever we have, 650 people. So I'm going to turn the microphone over to Richard to welcome everybody in addition to me, and I'll see you at the end of the program. Thank you.
And obviously everybody is welcome. So let's go ahead and pray, and we'll introduce our speaker. Father, thank you for a wonderful summer night, the chance to be together, to enjoy and learn and grow. So many younger people and our culture think that we who are in retirement years somehow stop growing, but we don't. And it's events like this that help us grow in wisdom and understanding, to think and to rethink things with the time to do that and the time to gain wisdom. We give you thanks for the speakers, the reviewers, the authors, the teachers, all the people that help us connect and grow in our retirement. That's your gift to us. We thank you for them, and we thank you because we know who gives all that to us. We pray all of this in the name of you, Father. Amen. And now, Dana Harkey, herself a reviewer, will introduce our speaker.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here tonight, and I'm so glad to introduce our speaker, Rebecca Blackwood. I've always thought that teachers have to have a little bit of actress or actor in them because they have to stand in front of a crowd that may not be receptive or might be very receptive and put on a show. And hopefully people go away with something. Well, Rebecca proves that true. She loved to read as a child, and she loved books and to be read to. And so when she went to college, she used that love of reading and books to get a major in English. in secondary English, and eventually she went back to the University of Arkansas. She went to undergrad at Ouachita. If you're a Baptist, you know what Ouachita is, or if you're from Arkansas, you might know what Ouachita is. But she went back to school at the University of Arkansas and got her master's in secondary education. She taught high school for many years in all kinds of places, and I said she felt like she was often performing, acting out Shakespearean plays, explaining plot twists and character flaws, quoting the meaningful poetry, explaining time signals, all those things that English teachers does. She even keeps good novels in the trunk of her car to hand out to students who might be interested. That's somebody who really loves to read. She and her husband live in Fort Worth, and she does a lot of substitute teaching in Fort Worth ISD High School. She is really a brave soul. Her friends think she's crazy. She and her husband have 2 children and 8 grandchildren. And 4 of the grandchildren have been with her for the last 4 days. And so if she seems a little shaky up here, give her some grace. In addition to reviewing books, she's very involved with her church, and she volunteers with several organizations. I ask her about her grandchildren, and her 14-year-old grandson is a soccer whiz, and the youngest, the 5-year-old, is a real whirling dervish, so that's another reason she's tired. But I asked her what her favorite volunteer was, and she said it's working with her church for the parents' dedication of babies. When the babies come to be dedicated in her church, she gets to help them and escort them into that. So that's a very wonderful volunteer opportunity. So you all, please welcome Rebecca Blackwood.
Thank you, Dana. My goodness. Thank you so much. Yes, I'm thrilled to be with you. I came all by myself in the car. And Dana, it's the last 10 days I've had my grandchildren. So if I begin to babble in nonsensical words, you'll know why. I thought if I played Candyland one more time, I didn't know what in the world I was going to do. I absolutely did not. Before I began, I have to tell you, I had the very special treat of meeting the author of this book, Jerrie Marcus Smith, and her lovely daughter, Allison. I gave this review at the Dallas Women's Club, and her mom and her daughter, Allison, came. And I visited with her beforehand and told her that I hope you don't mind that I pretend I'm you. And she said, oh, heavens, no. And then I had lunch with her, with Jerrie and her daughter, Allison, afterwards, and she was just delightful. A delightful woman. And then shortly after that, I heard she was in hospice and then indeed pass away. Our sincere condolences, Allison. Truly, that was a thrill for me. I stumbled upon this book, even though I'm from Arkansas. Oh, honey, we knew about Neiman Marcus. Dana's from Arkansas, and so we knew our fine department stores in Little Rock, but everybody knew about, that was the goal, to get to Dallas, to be able to shop at Neiman Marcus. Well, before I begin, I want to ask you just a few quick little things. How many of you know what a dry goods store is? Oh, you are my people. You are my people. How many of you know what sundries are? Yep. Oh, yes. How about a piece goods department? How many times have you felt fabric at a piece goods department? Yes. Oh, man. And then I asked my students all of this. They had no idea. And I said, what about notions? Well, inkling, you know. And when I said, can you say zippers and buttons? They had absolutely no idea. It's always great fun asking them things that I know they're not going to know. But if you can recognize any of that, all of that is folded into this book. And it is a wonderful book that I have given away for Christmas gifts. People that I ran into that worked at Neiman's, they said, oh my goodness, I just graduated from high school and I worked for a year at Neiman's before I got married. And so I've given it to a lot of people because it is chock full of wonderful, wonderful photographs. Very much like this one. As I said, I'm going to present this to you in first person. I'm going to pretend that I am the author, Jerrie Marcus Smith. And because I've taught 12th grade forever, I want to make sure y'all in the back are paying attention to that, because I gave this not very long ago, and a woman ran out and she said, "You were Stanley Marcus's daughter?" And I said, "You must have missed the first portion of it." No, but I do love being Jerrie in first person real time. A Girl Named Carrie by Jerrie Marcus Smith. When I was young, my Aunt Carrie seemed to me to be a humorless old woman. She was always dressed in black, kind of had a somber look. She was kind of thin. She was always dressed in black, as I said, and she usually had on her pearls and her gold bracelets. That's about all I can remember about her. She was my grandfather's younger sister. And the few things I knew about her were this. I knew she was divorced, but I didn't know how I knew that. Probably one of my siblings, or I overheard family members talking about it. I knew she didn't have any children, and I knew that she lived in a big 3-story brick house on Swiss Avenue. I knew that. Oh yes, I knew that, because my family had to go every Sunday for Sunday lunch, and then we would move to the parlor for dreary conversation. Oh, my siblings and I just hated going. It was just terrible. It was that dark house. We always thought it was kind of spooky. But we knew we were to be seen and not heard. We knew that. So my mother would set us on the divan, and if we were good, we got to go up on the second floor, and there was a large toy closet there. And oh, it was wonderful playing with all those toys. But if we were not so good, we didn't get to go. And there were several times that we started punching and kicking, and one of my siblings will fall off in the floor, and then my Aunt Carrie was sitting there with her arms crossed looking at us. And my mother was not pleased. No, indeed. My Aunt Carrie died in 1953. She was 69 years old, and she died of lung cancer. The day my great Aunt Carrie died, I was 16 years old. I was a senior at Hockaday. I was all about myself. Believe me, I was self-absorbed. I was spoiled. Why, the world revolved around me and my friends and what we were going to do next. Well, the very evening on the day that my Aunt Carrie died was our big costume party at Hockaday. Oh my goodness, my girlfriends, we had been talking about it for weeks and weeks. We were so excited we couldn't wait. Well, I got home from school that day and was in my bedroom, and my mother came in and said, "Jerrie, your Aunt Carrie passed away today." And I can remember thinking, well, of course she did. She was old and sick, certainly. But she said, "I'm sorry, Jerrie, but you won't be going to the costume ball this evening." And I thought, what? Well, I certainly will be going. Well, my father came home, who I adored, and said, "Jerrie, I know that you have been looking so forward to this party. I know you have, honey. And I'm just so sorry. You know your great Aunt Carrie passed away today. And you just can't go, sweetie. You just can't. It wouldn't look right. It wouldn't look right for friends and family, for people in the city. You just can't go. Well, as I think back on it all those years ago, I'm sure I was terrible. I have no doubt I was just pouty and probably pouted around for a couple of weeks. But obviously, I eventually got over it. As I grew a little bit older, a year or two, 3, I realized that there was a backstory to my Aunt Carrie. When I started my research was just really asking my older relatives about my great Aunt Carrie, their memories or their mementos from her or their letters that she had written. And I realized that there was so much more to my great Aunt Carrie than I'd ever imagined. My childhood impressions were flat out wrong. Growing up, I never understood why Aunt Carrie was so important. She just was. She just was. But you have to remember, I knew her in her later years when she had on a black dress, white pearls, and gold bracelets, and usually had her hands crossed like this. Very somber, kind of judging us children. But it's amazing. Now, almost 70 years later, friends that I meet will come up and say, "Oh, Jerrie, my mother told me she was shopping at Neiman Marcus one day, and she met your great Aunt Carrie, and how they had such a nice visit there on the first floor. Oh, my mother talked about it all her life." And then I met another woman that told me, "Jerrie, my mother accompanied Carrie to New York City to buy her wedding gown. She talked about it for years. It was just amazing that she was around your Aunt Carrie for nearly a week in New York City and bought the most beautiful wedding gown ever." As I delved more deeply into Carrie's life, I finally kind of began to see what I'd been missing. My relatives told me she was a regal woman, Jerrie. She was tall, she was thin, she had a beautiful neck, and she stood tall everywhere she went. And I thought, really? That is not at all the way I remembered my Aunt Carrie. She had an innate style. She had a knowledge of style and perfection, refinement, and she carried herself that way. My Uncle Laurie told me, he said, "Jerrie, let me tell you this about your Aunt Carrie. She had nerves of steel, but she had a heart of butter. She would do anything in the world for you, anything." Well, as I married and grew older and began to have my children, I found out that my great Aunt Carrie was a thoroughly modern businesswoman for her time, and that she was the quiet genius behind the success of the internationally known emporium of Neiman Marcus. My great aunt, that stern-looking woman, somber-looking, judgmental-looking, my relative said, "She's the reason that you enjoy your life, your lovely, very lovely life. The traveling you've done, Jerrie, your great Aunt Carrie is the reason for all of that." I'm told she was visible every single day in the store, every single day, visibly guiding the direction daily of the global success of the department store when I was just a little child trying to be good on her divan so I could go upstairs and play in the toy room. Well, as time went on, I learned, in fact, that my Aunt Carrie was adored by every member of our family, absolutely adored and respected in our family. I kept asking family members, older and younger, and I couldn't find a negative thought or comment about my great Aunt Carrie. My great Aunt Carrie was born in 1883 to Jewish immigrant parents. She was born in Louisville, Kentucky. But when she was 10 years old, her family got word from family members that there was money to be made in Hillsboro, Texas. Hillsboro, Texas, there was money to be made. And so the family decided, especially the dad, decided that they would move to dusty little Hillsboro, Texas. About that time, there was a population of about 5,000, a little over 5,000 in Hillsboro. And they joined other family members in the cotton broking business. And they did well. And in the photograph, you can see that Hillsboro was certainly a cotton capital, and it was also cattle ranching, that sort of thing. Well, my Aunt Carrie, at a very early age, I was told that she was different from most children, and especially in Hillsboro, Texas, of 5,000 people in a dusty little muddy town. Her family was very different. Of course, they were of immigrants. They were of German descent. German was spoken in the home, and not only that, they had a library, a real library, and it was expected that every child in the family read every one of these books, and they did. They did. It was also expected that the music they listened to was classical, and it was classical music. She knew German artists, she knew French artists, she certainly knew the difference between Mozart and Beethoven, Italian operettas. So with her reading skills, her language skills, her musical ability, she, to me, almost sounded like a Renaissance woman. Even though she was in this tiny little town of Hillsboro. Oh, she went to school. But after I found out all of this, the bulk of her education came from home. They also read newspapers, many, many different newspapers. They also got old newspapers. They didn't care if they were 2 years old. It didn't matter to them. They tried to get papers from New York City, San Francisco, St. Louis, even from Louisville, Kentucky. They tried also to get old magazines, and the children in the family were expected to read these newspapers and to read these magazines. They tried to get magazines from Europe, especially those that were written in German. And so here you had Carrie, who moved there when she was 10, and 11, 12, 13, 14, and she was really, to me, self-educating herself. Probably very different from many of the children that were in Hillsboro, Texas at that time. Her younger brother, Herbert, kind of grew restless in the town of Hillsboro, and he decided that in the year 1900, he was going to move to Dallas, and that's exactly what he did. He got a job at Sanger Brothers, billed as the greatest dry goods store west of the Mississippi. At that time, Dallas was a kind of a dirty city, mud streets, carts, wagons, pulled by horses. But he loved it there. And when he moved in 1900, Dallas had a population of about 38,000. So it was enormous compared to years they spent in Hillsboro. And he loved it. He loved it there. Well, he'd go home on the weekend and talk about how much he loved it, how much he loved his job. And Carrie became interested. She became real interested. And she asked him, "Can I join you in Dallas? I'll get a job." And he said, "Well, of course you can. You certainly can. Come right on." And she did. And in 1901, 1 year later, she came to Dallas, and she landed a job at A. Harris and Company, selling women's blouses. This was a new business, a really new business in Dallas, Texas, of selling ready-to-wear blouses. And this brand new idea, Carrie knew that every mother, grandmother, and aunt sewed. I mean, she knew that. Her relatives did as well. And she had been in a piece goods department many times, feeling on fabric. She knew exactly how to tell what was quality fabric and what wasn't. It didn't take her long, and she learned quickly that there is an art to making customers feel special. As I said, Carrie and Herbert both had this classical upbringing. They both enjoyed very expensive clothing, and they knew fine fabrics. They did, and they loved dressing up. At 18, Carrie displayed charm, refinement, beautiful, graceful in the way she moved. And as I said, my relatives said she was tall, she was thin, had a beautiful neck, carried herself well. My grandfather told me one day, Jerry, on your notes that you're writing, you need to know that your great Aunt Carrie was born with an inborn sense of style. She just knew. She just was born with it. And as I was thinking about that, I thought it was probably from years of reading these magazines that had ads in them, magazines from department stores, possibly in Europe somewhere. She was reading what was going on in the world, and especially in the United States of America, because her parents were fierce American patriots. Well, as a doe-eyed beauty, she courageously advanced to the head buyer. She bargained with her boss, did some back and forth, and she finally was making $25 a week, which was a huge amount of money. She was the best paid employee in the company. And as this beautiful woman, she went out and she bought the newest and most sophisticated styles of ladies' blouses, with the finest fabrics, of course, with the cleanest lines that a woman would want, superb workmanship, because she knew to turn that garment inside out. And if the seams didn't look as good as they did on the inside as they did on the outside, no. And of course, she pleased the owner, because she always bought at the best wholesale price. Of course. At the turn of the century, Dallas was a rough city. It was a rough city, especially for a single woman. I've been told that there were 46 saloons down there on Elm Street. But the siblings both knew that Dallas was a city on the rise, and it was becoming a little bit more cultured every year. Yes, there was the renegades, for sure, but it was becoming just a little bit more cultured. And not only that, they knew that there was money to be made, that eventually they could open their own business and they could make some real money. Not long after she had arrived, about a year, she met a young man named Al Neiman. Indeed, he was handsome, a very handsome man. He loved fine clothing, just like Carrie and her brother loved fine clothing. But he was totally the opposite of Carrie. He barely had a grade school education. He grew up in a rough orphanage in the north. But as I said, he was handsome, he was well-dressed, but he was also flamboyant. One of the relatives told me, Jerry, he was scrappy, and that's not a good thing. Had a big ego, they didn't like him, but they had a whirlwind courtship. And in 1905, they married. The relatives could not understand, why would this genteel, soft-spoken lady marry Al Neiman? They were puzzled, but indeed she did. And she did have a beautiful home wedding and a beautiful wedding gown. Well, shortly after they married, they had been married about a year, and Al came home and got Herbert to come over, and he had the threesome. And Al said, I've heard that there's money to be made in Atlanta, Georgia. We need to move to Atlanta, Georgia. Now, Al had a business, and it was doing fairly well. It was called the American Salvage Business, and it was over in Fort Worth. He came back and forth to Dallas, and what he did, he bought product from businesses that were going out of business, and then he resold it. And like I said, it was doing well. It was. The brother and sister still kept their jobs in the clothing stores. But when Al said, we need to move, well, the brother and sister didn't want to move. They didn't, but Al talked them into it. He was a smooth talker, and he talked them into it. So the threesome went to Atlanta, Georgia, and they started a salvage business. Now, Carrie worked diligently in the business, but she thought the salvage business was a little unsavory, shall we say. You remember, she loved beautiful things, and she had an appreciation for beautiful things, but she worked very hard. Herbert did as well. Well, after they had been there about a year and a half, Carrie just said, we want to go back home, Al. We miss our family. Al didn't have any family, but she had a large extended family, and many of them had moved to Dallas. And then, of course, they would go home to Hillsborough to their parents. And she said, I just miss my parents so much. Please, we'll sell our business here, and then we'll go back to Dallas. And reluctantly, Al agreed. He said, okay. So they put their business on the market. They got 2 offers. One was for $25,000 cash, which was a great deal of money. That was good money. And then a group of Atlanta investors came to them and said, now we're not going to give you any money, but we will give you a franchise in a new sugary drink called Coca-Cola. Well, they knew that you could go to the drugstore and for a nickel a glass, you could get Coca-Cola, and they liked it. They liked it fine, and they knew people liked it. So the threesome got together with their offers, and they said, you know, Coca-Cola may not have staying power. So they decided that they would take the $25,000. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard my father at a gala, a business meeting, a party that we were going to, a dinner party, something, telling them all that the department store Neiman Marcus was founded on the worst business decision that could ever be made. My dad said if they had taken that franchise, that Coca-Cola quickly became the most popular, the most successful product in American history, and probably still is today. He said we would have been mega rich. Oh, my goodness. And everybody just laughed. But in the long run, it was really a good decision. They came back with their $25,000, and they decided, the threesome, that they wanted to open a store, a ready-to-wear store. Al agreed too. He did. Remember, he loved to dress up. He loved fine clothing. And he agreed with the siblings. That's what we're going to do. Now, you have to remember, this was long before the oil boom came to Texas. But Carrie and Herbert knew that there was money in Dallas, and there was people that could pay for ready-to-wear clothing. They'd seen it. They knew exactly that there was plenty of customers out there. Well, they began to talk about their store. And of course, Carrie and Herbert, they wanted their store to be special. They wanted it to be an experience. When you opened the door, they wanted it to be unlike anything that it was in Dallas. They talked about a piece goods department, but they finally decided no. And when I thought about that, this is just me thinking about my aunt, I just thought, I bet Aunt Carrie did not want women coming through the door thinking about back-breaking work, sewing into the night to finish a garment for the next day for the child to wear to school. She said, no. I can just hear her saying, no, everything in this department store is going to take them to another world. Every single thing. And they did agree, okay, no piece goods department. So, with their money and some money that the family had given, they were kind of bumping up to $50,000. I mean, that was a good amount of money. So they looked for places to lease in downtown Dallas. By this time, it was 1907. Dallas had doubled almost in population. It was 86,000 people in Dallas. That was a good sized town. They found a building at the corner of Elm and Murphy that was for lease. They looked at it, and they knew that the carpets would have to be changed. They knew the light fixtures and so forth. It was now $9,000 a month rent, and that was a good bit to rent this department store or this building that they would turn into a department store. And the more I thought about that, I thought, $9,000 a month. This is amazing for these three young people. These three young people, Herbert was 29, Al was 27, and Carrie was just 24 years old. Three young people that were going to start out with a nest egg of money, and they were determined to be successful. They went full steam ahead. They signed the lease. They knew that they could clear $8,000 a month. They just knew they could make a profit. They knew it. Each of the three were given a special job. Well, to me, when I found out what my Aunt Carrie was responsible for, I was amazed. She had, to me, the most critical job of all. She was to buy every article of clothing that was to be sold in Neiman Marcus, every single one. So I thought, the hopes and dreams of the success of this store really were hers. And if it failed, it would be terrible for her. She had to pick the right clothes for the right customers, and having never traveled except in magazines and books and so forth. She went to New York City. The men, Herbert and her husband Al, gave her $17,000. And they said, you spend this on the goods for the business. Beautiful, ready-to-wear clothing. And that's what she did. She bought different kinds. She knew what a good cotton felt like, and she knew what a good cotton blouse would look like. She bought silk, she bought satin, she bought taffeta, beautiful taffeta dresses. She bought even some wool items. With her impeccable taste, her great confidence, she was also a pro at advertising. Here again, I thought back, as a teenager, as a little one, reading these magazines, she knew that advertising was the key. She knew this was a full-page ad, beautiful dress, and it has all types of information about this ready-to-wear store that would open soon. She knew that the talk would filter out, and she wanted the first day of opening to be wonderful. Well, The store opened in September of 1907. Word had spread. People were outside of the door, and when the doors flung open, people were wide-eyed and so impressed. The men had taken part of the money to buy new carpets. They bought new light fixtures, beautiful, beautiful new light fixtures. They bought cases, the very latest cases. And you can tell by this that this was not a mom and pop shop. No, they hired 35 salespeople to work in the business. So this was a real department store. As I said, people were so impressed. And within a month of the opening, every piece of clothing that Carrie had bought, all the merchandise was sold out. All of it. Right here in the heart of Texas, down in downtown Dallas, customers were enjoying the same couture, ready-to-wear clothing that they were enjoying in New York, in San Francisco, St. Louis. It was really quite amazing. My dad often told me, too, when we'd start talking about Aunt Carrie and the business, my grandfather, Herbert, he would say, I'll tell you this, even though I hadn't been born then, even though my father had not been born, he said, I want to tell you this, from my father, all my other aunts, everybody knows that in about 2 months after the opening of Neiman Marcus, Carrie seemed to create what we all know of now as the Neiman Marcus style, the Neiman Marcus brand. And he said she had no idea what she was doing, but everybody looked to her because she was wearing the brand, was talking about the brand, even though she had on her black dress, her white pearls, and her gold bracelets every single day at the store. That's all she wore. Because my dad said to Aunt Carrie, she wanted to elevate the customer. She was merely the clerk, helping the customer. It was amazing. Yes, my dad said, Carrie was the backbone of the store. She absolutely was. She still had no children, sadly. She worked innumerable hours, he said, often working directly with the customer. My dad often told me, too. He said she would walk up to a customer, and he said, I told you, Jerry, that Carrie possessed a queenly quality to herself. And she would walk down the aisles as if she were manner-born. And one day she stopped and was talking to a customer on the second floor in ladies' apparel. And she was talking, this was a very good customer, a customer that spent lots of money at Neiman Marcus. And she greeted her, and they chatted a minute. The clerk was standing there, and of course Carrie wanted to know what she was looking for. Well, she was looking for something to wear to a wedding. And so my dad said that his dad said that Carrie just stepped over to the clerk and said, "Child, watch me and I'll show you how it's done." And consequently, Carrie said, "Come on into the parlor. Come on in. The dressing rooms are here, and you sit down on the sedan." And my dad said, Carrie sat in a chair, and she instructed 2 or 3 clerks, "You need to get that plum knit suit. It's in the front window. Go get that. And would you get that black handbag that's downstairs on the first floor?" And my dad said that Grandpa Herbert said, she was just like air traffic control, what we have now. She said, and 2 hours later, the customer left highly satisfied with numerous purchases. And my grandfather said, and she had never left the chair. Telling people what to choose. No, that's not what you should wear. Let's try on the next stuff. He said it was really quite amazing. And this became a way of doing business that lasted for years. You make the customer feel special. You make them feel cared for. You make them feel like you're never, ever, ever rushing them, ever. If they stayed all day, that was fine. Well, that was customer service at its highest level. And you know what? It worked like magic. It truly did. 5 years later, in May of 1913, a fire destroyed the store. And of course, they knew that World War II was right there, just right there. They knew that. And they were very mindful of that. They were buying at many different price points. And like I said, they were patriotic Americans. They were so grateful to live in this country. Probably, as I thought about it, they perhaps had relatives in Germany, or they knew friends of friends that had relatives in Germany. They knew exactly what was happening, the horror that was rolling across Europe. They knew that. There were some questions in the family about, you think they'll reopen? And the threesome said, absolutely we'll reopen. We indeed will, and this time we'll build our own building, and it will be larger, bigger, and better. And they found property on the corner of Main and Irvay in downtown Dallas, a vacant lot. 15 months later, just 15 months later, they opened their store in August of 1914. 40,000 square feet of shopping opportunity. And it had many, many new departments in the store, such as a Missy department. No one in Dallas had a Missy department. And Carrie knew there were people with money that would buy for their teenage daughters, for sure. Absolutely. Well, even though with World War I, they were slowly going up. Absolutely. Years passed, 5, 10 years, still no children, sadly. And by now, Al was getting a little full of himself. Al loved a lot of things. Al loved fine food. He loved fine spirits. He loved gambling. And he loved beautiful women. He was openly flirting in the city of Dallas with some of the Dallas socialites. He was openly flirting with several of the clerks on the store floor. And of course, Carrie was mortified, absolutely mortified. But she just turned her head and worked even harder. But as time went on, Al was beginning to drink heavily, and he would become extremely argumentative, even in the store, kind of picking fights almost. And like I said, she was horrified, and I'm sure she would be. Absolutely. They had worked so hard in this business, and she was not going to let him destroy it. Well, in 1926, my dad, Stanley, graduated from Harvard Business School. Well, it was always known that my dad would come into the business. I mean, he grew up in the business. He ran up and down that business all of his life. And he went to Harvard, and he was going to join the threesome. The threesome. But when he came back and joined Neiman Marcus, Al hated it. He hated everything about it. He hated my dad being there. Absolutely hated it. And I think probably picked fights with him, trying to embarrass him. It was not good. It wasn't. All three of them, my dad, Stanley, Carrie, and her brother Herbert, said, we've got to do something. This can't go on. And they got together and they said, let's buy Al. out. We're going to offer him a good sum of money. And I bet he'll take it. And so they called Al in, and they sat down with him, and they said, you don't really like this business. This is not really what you want to do. We're prepared to offer you $250,000. And he thought about that for a minute, and he took it. He did. He took it. They were thrilled, absolutely thrilled that he was out of the business. But I have to say, his affairs continued, his drunkenness, fights, so forth. So 2 years later, in 1928, my great-aunt Carrie filed for divorce. Now, she knew, and especially in the 20s, that a divorced woman definitely had a black mark against them. But she didn't care. She said, I can't do this. I can't do this anymore. And remarkably, my grandfather said, Carrie didn't miss a beat. Carrie continued to have an extraordinary reputation in town, and she remained Dallas's chief arbiter of style and grace. Amazing. It really was amazing to me. As I look back on it, I knew that I had benefited, so much from this business. I did things that majority of people never got to do. I mean, I was in Europe when I was a child. It was amazing, truly amazing. She had many jobs in the store. I heard many people say that. She worked with the store's budget. She, of course, buying the store's merchandise. But by now, she had hand-picked buyers that she would send out, and they knew exactly what she wanted. She understood how to sell. She knew how to accommodate her customers, and she always, always, always stressed to her salespeople, before you leave at the end of the day, know your stock. Know what you have in case the first woman that walks in here says, I'm looking for some brown leather kid gloves. You should know immediately if you have them. Immediately. And then she said, because I probably do. I probably do. I stay long after you're gone, and I make sure I know what's in this building. So know your stock. Herbert Stanley, my dad, and my great-aunt Carrie were a force. Now, the Depression was coming along, and they knew this. They bought at several different price points. They knew that America was in terrible shape. But they also knew that in Dallas, there were people that had money. They were. But as I said, they bought at different price points. They knew that possibly somebody would come in and buy something very small just to say they had a purchase at Neiman Marcus. My grandfather told me that he was in New York City with Carrie one day, and they were in a designer's salon, and the designer was going to show them dresses. The designer brought out a rack of dresses, and my Aunt Carrie stood up, and she looked through the dresses, and then she began picking up the hems and turning them inside out. And she went all the way down, and she turned to the designer and said, Neiman Marcus won't be purchasing any dresses. Thank you very much. And he said, why? And she said, well, since you asked me, I will tell you. The seam binding in these dresses is rayon. Rayon. My customers require pure silk. And the designer said, we will change every dress. And she said, well, in that case, we'll take them all. It was amazing. My dad was in a European designer's house in New York, and the designer brought out a rack of skirts. Carrie was sitting on the divan, and she looked at the skirts. She did get up, my dad said, and kind of went over and looked at the rack of skirts. and turned to the designer and said, "I don't think Neiman Marcus will be carrying skirts this year," and left. And my dad, when they got outside, said, "Why didn't you buy those skirts? The designer told you they were all the rage." And my Aunt Carrie turned and said, "Stanley, you need to know something. Every one of those skirts were big old hunky box pleated gathered skirts. Listen to me. Women do not want to look bigger." No. And my dad said in 3 months there wasn't a box pleated big old hunky skirt to be found anywhere. He said she just knew. It was amazing. She just knew. My dad also told me she had the uncanny ability to smell the future. He said we would be sitting there, and we had our spring line, and she would say, "You know, I bet next spring, I think the color is going to be raspberry," the spring line. And my dad said, "We went to market, raspberry was everywhere." He said it was just amazing. She just knew. She knew how long the skirts would be, and she certainly knew how short the skirts would be. What was the latest in Europe? She just knew. Well, the 30s came along, and as I said, the Depression. But despite the Depression and what was going on, Carrie began to host. Oh, there's the earlier picture of Neiman's. Dirt streets, muddy, and there you see it right there on the right. She began to host fashion shows. They were live fashion shows with live models, and they were a huge success. They were free to the public and an enormous, enormous success. Of course, the people the women that could afford it came, but I'm sure many others came just to see what this was about. No one in Dallas did this. No one. They were doing this in New York. Carrie said, "Why can't we do this in Dallas, Texas?" And that's exactly what she did. They also provided lenient credit, lenient terms, and as I said, lower priced items. But my grandfather told me that probably, he said, once a month, especially during the Depression era, that Carrie would come up to me. She had been buying, she had sent her buyers out, and she said, "Herbert, we will never, ever put profit over quality, ever. We may not make very much money. We may not clear a lot during these lean years, but quality is what we're going for at all times." In 1937, Fortune magazine, which was a very popular magazine, featured Neiman Marcus in an article. It was called Dallas in Wonderland. It was the first time Fortune magazine had ever targeted a Texas business, and Carrie was beside herself, thrilled to death, because she knew that people all over the country that were taking Fortune magazine were seeing that the state of Texas isn't all renegades and cattle, and it had a beautiful, beautiful department store in Dallas. She was thrilled, absolutely thrilled. In 1939, she began, along with my dad, began what they called Neiman Marcus Awards for Distinguished Service in the field of fashion. Here again, they honored photographers, they honored models, certainly honored designers, the best designers that they sold the most product of, celebrities, and they had these awards in Dallas, Texas, consequently bringing more people to the state of Texas and the city of Dallas. She loved it, absolutely loved it, spreading the word that Texas and Dallas was a wonderful place to be. In 1941, This is Carrie in her black dress, her pearls, and her gold bracelet. They continued the live runway shows, and also they added the Oscar of fashion. They decided that a European designer they would start with, and consequently bringing people to Dallas that were in Europe coming here with their entourage of models, of photographers, so forth. It was amazing, but they were very mindful, extremely mindful of World War II. To attend many of these shows, you had to buy a war bond in order to get in. She gave a great deal of money to the war effort, and as I said, a truly, truly great American. There are photographs in the book. Bunting, red, white, and blue bunting are on the outside of the building and on the inside of the building. As she aged, my father told me, your Aunt Carrie kept up. She kept up. She didn't age and just stay in her home. Oh no, she kept up. She kept up with fashion. I love this dress. Don't you love this dress? Ooh, I would love to wear that dress somewhere. And long gloves and that hat's fabulous. She kept up. She read current literature. She knew what the Pulitzer Prize winning novel was. She read it and she put it in her library. She enjoyed current theater, certainly the symphonies, the operas that came here. And I was told by one relative that she loved the masters painting, and she especially loved Renoir, which doesn't surprise me for a woman that looked like she was manor born. Renoir is beautiful. Another thing I was told that my Aunt Carrie handled all of her own business matters when women didn't have a checkbook. Many women had no idea where their husbands banked. Some of my relatives said every Friday a woman would get, here's your money, and this is the cash money, and this is for you to run the home on all week. And that's how it was. And that's the way it was for years. Many times, I'm sure that my Aunt Carrie just picked up the phone and called the president of the bank. And I'm sure he dropped everything just to talk to her. Absolutely. My father had told me, yes, your Aunt Carrie had strong convictions. She had really strong convictions. But she was probably the most modest woman I've ever known. And when I was going through all the photographs, my family members brought photographs. As I was going through them, my Aunt Carrie was usually at the back of the group. Sometimes she even had her head turned. She was content to be in the back, very modest. My Uncle Laurie also told me, sadly, because Carrie was a woman, that she was rarely given credit for the trailblazing integral role that she played in the success of Neiman Marcus. It was always the men who were front and center. But as I said, from the photographs, she seemed content to be in the back in her gracious, modest way. As she aged, people would ask her, and especially reporters would ask her, what are you most proud of with the store? And almost instantly she said, what it did for Dallas, Texas, what it did for the state, what it did for the city. People came into the city and knew that this was a wonderful city, a wonderful place to live. She believed strongly in giving back to her community, and she did, monetarily. Like I said, fierce American patriot. She loved giving to her temple. She didn't attend regularly, I'm told. On holy days, she went, but she gave generously to the temple. Over the years, my dad told me that customers relied on Carrie, especially good customers, and ones that they had become friends, relied on her not only for her fashion advice, but after talking to her, they would confide everything to her, from their personal triumphs to their deepest secrets, because they knew Carrie would never tell. It was said that my great aunt Carrie probably knew more about the vagaries of high society Dallas than anyone in town. But of course, as my dad said, oh, I'm positively sure, Jerry, she kept their confidences and no doubt sent them on their way with a few lovely purchases to make them feel better. Yes. As progress came to Neiman Marcus, my dad wanted to install escalators. Well, my great aunt Carrie said, absolutely not. No, we're not going to have escalators. Why? Women don't want to ride an escalator. They're common. No, we're not going to have an escalator. Well, my dad kept badgering, and eventually he won out. Well, Carrie announced that she would never ride the escalator, and my dad told me she didn't, ever. Well, after it was installed, my father knew how badly Aunt Carrie hated those escalators. So he hired a designer to have something beautiful for the rider that's going up and down to see, and it became the Hanging Gardens, which people loved. I see you shaking your head that you love the Hanging Gardens. Well, when other department stores heard about that, they copied it because they thought it was wonderful too. At 66, she was appointed chairman of the board, my great aunt Carrie. In this photograph, these are not young ingenues modeling gowns. These are some of the Dallas socialites that she had model one day. And there you see my great aunt Carrie in her black dress, her white pearls, and her gold bracelets. Yes, at 66, she was appointed chairman of the board, and she lived to see the first branch store open at Preston Center. And my father said she was so proud that it had extended that far. 3 years later, when I was 16 years old and self-absorbed, spoiled, my Aunt Carrie passed away in 1953. After her death, many of her items were gifted to the Merchandise Mart here in Dallas. Thousands of pieces of correspondence and clothing were given to the University of North Texas for their fashion collection there. For students, for writers, for photographers, for designers to study. SMU was gifted with many of her belongings. Although many luxury department stores have come and gone, Neiman Marcus remains the pinnacle of high fashion, beautiful ambiance, selling couture ready to wear now to people around the world, not to mention the longevity that Neiman Marcus has had over 100 years. And I have to say, I'm proud of it. I'm proud of the longevity of our store. With her sophisticated air, her old world elegance, my Aunt Carrie, who was born with it and made the brand Neiman Marcus, truly was an amazing woman. Al lived 16 more years. He passed away when he was 95. That was the year 1970. He died in Arlington, Texas, at a home for the aged Masons. He died penniless and alone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you. I think if I'd had somebody like Rebecca Blackwood as a high school teacher, I'd have been a lot smarter.
Well,
And I certainly would have listened better.
yes, because, you had to listen to me. That was a given.
And I think, as these people will attest, everybody had a good time tonight.
I acted out Shakespeare. I did it all. I was on the desk trying to get their attention. And of course, now it's much harder. They're all on a phone. You know that, right? Reading a book is so foreign to them, they have a hard time
Well,
with
that's the
that.
beauty about this. Every Wednesday in June and July, we don't do that. We come and listen to a great book reviewer.
That's right. Well, and I did want to tell you, am I talking too long?
No.
I wanted to tell you that Allison put together at SMU about a year ago, in SMU, at the library there on the campus, an exhibition of her mother's things, of Aunt Carrie's things. See, I forget that I'm not Jerrie. It's those
But
grandchildren.
you've got a black dress and pearls.
I'm telling you, those grandchildren will do you in, especially at a water park. Oh, mercy. And I did go. I attended, and she had some of her Carrie's dresses, and some of these dresses were 80 years old. If there wasn't a camera, I would have tiptoed over there. They were fabulous. The coats, they were really beautiful clothing. A lot of her correspondence was there, and also her gold bracelets were there that you could see. And Allison told me then that she hopes to do another exhibition sometime, and so we'll watch for that for sure. Thank you.
All right, everybody, next week, come see Kathleen Kent. Her new book, Black Wolf, is out in the last couple of 3-4 months. So we're all excited to see Kathleen. Everybody have a great week, and see you next Wednesday.